There are many long and clunky definitions of temporary works, but at its heart, temporary works is the art and science of safe and effective construction methods. Unfortunately, temporary works are still considered as an afterthought at a later stage by many. This means that solutions are often sought under pressure and with inadequate budgets. If temporary works is embraced early, it should open avenues for quicker and safer construction methods, which should result in higher quality structures. If we think about the great structures of the ancient past, like the pyramids, the real allure and mystique isn't so much about what is there, it's more about how it came to be there. How did these ancient civilizations come to build such structures without the aid of mechanical cranes and powered machinery? This is perhaps the world's most famous temporary works mystery. Temporary works at its apex is design organisations and site teams working together seamlessly with a clear understanding of the objectives.
My name's Mike Ford. I'm a temporary works consultant within Rubik's. Trying to explain what temporary works is, it can be a whole host of things, essentially to aid safe construction. It can be very obvious things that the general public would recognise, such as a scaffold around a building to get access to it, or it might be boxed up shuttering for wet concrete to be poured into. But there's also sort of less obvious things, such as in a refurbishment of an existing building, the contractor might need to take a piece of structure out in a short-term situation to get access. The kind of thing that we would do, we would check if that is an appropriate thing to do in the short term, and if it isn't, tell them what to do to enable them to do that. So it can be about things that aren't actually equipment or gear. It can be quite sort of esoteric things, really.
For a new build, I would picture the building in my mind's eye, and everything I would see in the picture I would consider as permanent works, and then everything else that's on site would be temporary works. The duration of temporary works is a factor, as it's in BS 5975 that the maximum period for temporary works to be used is 2 years, so anything beyond that can be considered permanent works.
What is temporary works? Well, on a construction project, the permanent works is what's left at the end of the construction period, and temporary works is the necessary structures and load cases necessary to get the permanent works constructed. So it could be a temporary foundation for a crane, for example, an excavation support, or on a refurb project, it's often necessary to make 2 small rooms into 1 big room, and the permanent works engineer will design a beam to support the rest of the structure. But the temporary works is taking out the wall and propping the rest of the structure so it doesn't collapse while you install the replacement beam.
Temporary works are structures that are put in place to allow safe and efficient construction of the permanent structure, but they're not intended to be a part of the permanent works itself. They get removed once the construction processes are completed. In terms of examples, there's loads of them. You can notice them on every site: scaffolding, ground supports, formwork, propping, tower crane foundations, and similar.
Temporary works, I think, can add huge value to any construction project, and I think that temporary works and construction can't be separated. They're intrinsically linked. So temporary works, if done properly and considered at the right time, can add huge benefits to the health and safety of a project, to programme, and also to cost.
If the permanent works thinks about temporary works when he's designing the permanent works, savings and economies and more efficiency can definitely be had. For example, if a retaining wall is required on the edge of a site, which is a common situation because developers want to maximise the use of the site, then there's not normally sufficient working space behind the wall, so some sort of temporary wall has to be installed to construct the permanent wall. And if the permanent works designer thought it through, he'd be able to incorporate both together, so it was only necessary to have one wall.
Can temporary works add value to construction projects? Absolutely. Within what we do within civil engineering, a project can be successful and can fail due to the ground and the ground conditions. Equally, if due consideration is not given to temporary works, then there is the potential for there to be constructability issues and potentially incidents on sites. This can be damaging to the brand of the contractor. So having a temporary works engineer and a temporary works team involved in the early stages allows them to review what's going on and make recommendations where there are potentially gaps in information, so they can go and do more investigation, or make recommendations to the permanent works. So an example of that could be if you are constructing a new multi-storey car park, and with a multi-storey car park you're going to have false work for the slabs above. This is likely to need back propping. If the temporary works engineer is involved in the early stages, there could be the discussion had about potentially increasing the capacity within the lower slabs. This may result in an increased slab thickness and more reinforcement, which is not necessarily needed for the permanent works but would assist the construction side of it. Doing this may allow for the lower levels to be released back to the client earlier, and if it's released back earlier, can they then open up those lower floors and start generating revenue? So it allows for us to have those conversations early on.
Thinking about how good temporary works can add value to projects and how you might measure that. Temporary works is about making a safe and appropriate method of construction, and very often that's about sequencing the works as much as finding a solution to an obvious problem. And so being able to come up with solutions that are both appropriate and cost effective, you can really add value to the project through its program and its timing, and enabling the contractor to meet their program can often be a much better beneficial situation for them, rather than struggling with a great big piece of temporary work. So we would look to try and provide solutions that help the program and enable them to work efficiently and safely. This is about sort of working holistically with the construction team as a whole at an early stage, and I would always encourage that and advocate to get, where possible, if you're invited to get involved as early as you can in a project, particularly anything with that's technically challenging. I think there's great opportunity to work with a site team and their design team and help them develop solutions that aren't just about providing a piece of temporary works, but more about thinking again how things are constructed, the sequence involved, and particularly for design and build projects, if there's scope to alter or suggest changes or differences of approach to the permanent works, which might then result in a much smoother, time efficient, cost efficient way of building it.
Temporary works is very varied. I would say pure and simply that's probably the most enjoyable thing is how varied it is. It's varied in terms of the schemes that you work on. There's a wide range of temporary works items that you can cover in a career, but there are a core of very common items that move from site to site, but the beauty of it is you get a different site team, you get different opinions, different geography. You very rarely end up doing the same thing more than 2 or 3 times. It brings that natural variation as you move from site to site, and being able to work on a variety of different schemes just helps keep it interesting and not boring really. But in addition to the variety of schemes is also the variety of projects. I've worked on large infrastructures like HS2, Thames Tideway, the new sewage system in London, nuclear submarine warehouses in Barrow, and you can go from that to small village single-storey primary schools to museum refurbishments in little villages. So there's a full range of projects you can get involved with as well, and that does help keep things interesting. It's not only the sort of topics that you do, but it's the range of materials as well. As a temporary works engineer, you can design with steel, concrete, timber, off-the-shelf proprietary systems as well. So you do cover a range of items that it really does help sort of broaden your learning and knowledge as well.
So what do I enjoy about temporary works? For me, it's almost being at the coalface. You are working very closely with the contractor to take the design and turn it into reality. You're coming up with solutions that are easy to install and is based on readily available materials. What one contractor may be able to obtain up in the north of England may be different to what a contractor down the south of England may be able to obtain. So it's about having those conversations and that dialogue to see what they would like to do. It's also about as close as you can get to being on site without actually being on site, so you can still enjoy the creature comforts of a warm office in winter and a cool office in the summer.
I've always enjoyed the whole notion of temporary works from when I first started working on site, so I was always keen to get involved in a formwork design and enjoying the technical challenge of finding a solution to a problem, but also being able to draw that out and communicate it to the guys on site, being able to justify its adequacy through calculation and methods that are acceptable across the industry. So I've always enjoyed that aspect of it. Just being involved with sites and that kind of immediacy that you get from construction activity, there's a buzz around that which is great. We really enjoy being able to provide a service that's appreciated. We get good feedback, and being able to help sites sleep at night, knowing that they're working safely, knowing that they've got a plan in place and they can see how it's all going to work. That's part of what we do and part of what I do. The interaction with practical people on sites, dealing with real things, being able to see things that you design and the things that you might check, you can see them in real life.
The variety of the work is what I enjoy most, and often I'm working on several different projects at any one time and juggling deadlines as information comes in. It's a wide variety of work for a number of different clients, and there's always something new and interesting.
I really enjoy the temporary works vary a lot because that gives you an opportunity to be involved in a number of various projects, starting from like residential and commercial buildings, but it can be big infrastructures like bridges and highways.
I enjoy that there's so many different types of temporary works. Designs are always different, and that gives me a new challenge every day.
The biggest challenge about temporary works is one to do with time, and I think it's one that affects not just designers but everybody involved generally in construction. I would say it's compounded when you come to temporary works, because I think there's a lack of general awareness about what temporary works is and then how to find solutions to temporary works problems. And I think very often, due to late identification of temporary works, you only know the problem once you're there dealing with it, and that gives us, as designers, very short and condensed time frames to give solutions to what can be very complicated, very often health and safety critical problems. You're working under site pressure, and because there's been a late identification of the need for temporary works, there's often a lack of cost provision or budget available for the site team to use, and that really can limit your options in terms of what you can give them. The issue is quite deep rooted. There's no real quick fix to get around that. I think until we educate people involved in construction about temporary works and generally raise that collective level of awareness, that problem will remain.
So what's challenging about temporary works? Most things we get taught when we're younger, like when we're at school and when we're at university, is to be proactive. You know, if you've got homework coming up, you make sure you don't do it at the last minute. Likewise with coursework at university, you don't leave it to the last minute. Now with temporary works, we are as proactive as we can be. There is a temporary works register that is created and maintained throughout the life cycle of the project. However, temporary works is very reactive. There will be items that have not necessarily been foreseen, or there's changes to what had already been agreed. An example of that is a crane comes to site which is different to the crane that was stated in the lift plan. Therefore, outrigger loads have changed. So you then need to be able to react quickly to those changes, because if you can't react quickly, then there's potential for delays on site, and delays on site can be costly.
Some of the most challenging aspects of temporary works are, in my opinion, some of the things that entice you into the temporary works field. A lot of what I've said is exciting and keeps you interested in it. It can have a negative aspect as well. Far too many times for our liking, we will get a design brief sent through that's, oh yeah, by the way, we need that yesterday, sort of a classic line. It does make it tricky to manage resources, your own workload, and actually, you know, achieve the deadlines that you're working to with such short time frames. Another one is communication. It's key in most forms of life, communication, but more often than not, design change is very easy to deal with if it's communicated early enough and clear enough.
So advice for the next generation of temporary works engineers and coordinators and the like. My advice would be to don't forget to sketch things out and try and develop concepts, a big picture approach, rather than jumping into detail and jumping on the calculator and trying to solve it with numbers. In today's world of computer-aided design and calculation packages, it's very easy to jump to a tried and tested solution, which may be appropriate, but there are other ways of looking at things, involving a team of people to look at options, to bounce ideas off each other. Thinking about sustainability, it's a term that's been used for quite a number of years in the industry, and the construction industry is notoriously slow to evolve, but then we're working out on sites in all weathers, and the technology has to be adaptable to an outdoor environment. But finding new and innovative ways of providing solutions that materials can be reused, that kind of thing is an area of exploration, I believe. Temporary works is quite well administered these days, and there's quite a lot of procedural aspects to it, and my advice would be to always be prepared to challenge the brief and just to try and understand the bigger picture so that you can get to the bottom of the problem, and maybe you can offer a better solution that the site are asking for.